everybody. This is another episode of PSN. I'm Petros Masha, your host, and today's episode we're going to talk about, as in light of today, it's August the 12th, 2015. 21 years ago today, Major League Baseball went on strike, which prevented the Montreal Expos, as they were 74 and 40, leading the National League East. They were prevented from winning the title, and it eventually caused them, which is part of the reasons why they relocated to Washington. From the Washington Nationals 10 years later, they started playing 05. But I want to explain what the other reasons were which killed baseball here in Montreal. The first reason on what killed baseball in Montreal, first reason that started everything slowly, were the Toronto Blue Jays. And I say this because in 1977, the Blue Jays came into the league in the American League East. But from 1969 until 1976, the Montreal Expos were the only Canadian team. So they had all the broadcasting rights to broadcast all the games from across the country, from the east to the west coast. But when the Toronto Blue Jays came in, in the late 70s, things were okay for the most part, whatever. But then after the 1980s, they were wondering, why are the Expos allowed to broadcast games in Southern Ontario, which is considered to be their territory? So what they did was they kept on complaining to Major League Baseball, and Major League Baseball granted that the Toronto Blue Jays had exclusive territory, meaning the Montreal Expos could not televise their games in Southern Ontario all the way across the country. They were only able to do Quebec and the Atlantic provinces. But the Toronto Blue Jays were able to broadcast all their games across Canada, because back then it's not like now with revenue sharing, in which teams made their money, which the small, like back then teams would make their money through radio and television. Back then there was no revenue sharing. Revenue sharing is much different. There's more revenue sharing now than there was back then. So this time in the 80s. So then next thing you know, Charles Brofman, the owner at the time, kept they but their arguments, and the commissioner at the time was Pete Uberoth, or whatever his name was, and he gave a compromise saying that the Expos can televise 15 games a year of their choice in Southern Ontario, but after 15 they have to pay. And Charles Brofman said no. So therefore, for the rest of their existence, from the 80s to 2004, the Montreal Expos were only allowed to broadcast their games from Quebec, a certain portion of Ontario, but not all the way down, and the Atlantic provinces, while the Toronto Blue Jays broadcasted all their games across the country. And obviously the Expos could not get local sponsors and whatnot, so it was kind of hard because they weren't making much money through television and radio. So that's why they, slowly started to fall. The second reason was when Charles Brofman sold the team. Charles Brofman was the heir to the Seagram's fortune at the time, and he had very deep pockets, and he had said that after they moved to the Olympic Stadium, right, obviously from one point in time they were actually outdrawing the New York Yankees. I'm going to get to Olympic Stadium in a sec, which is the third reason, what I'm going to say, but the Expos from one point had outdrew the New York Yankees in 2 consecutive years in 82 and 83. But the problem was Olympic Stadium was too cavernous. So when people were not coming, they were getting 20,000, 11,000. Charles Brofman was losing between $10 to $20 million a year. So eventually, in 1989, it was draining on him. He decided to sell the team. And unfortunately, he couldn't find local owners because the people who were interested in buying it were going to buy the team and relocate them somewhere else. But the commissioner, Fay Vincent, he wanted to keep baseball in Montreal. So his right-hand man, Charles Brofman, was Claude Brochu, and he decided to find a partnership on his own. So what he did was that him and 12 other investors came up with enough money to buy the team off of Charles Brofman. So then he took over, I think, in 91. And he became the owner, and then it just led to a downward spiral, which I'm going to get to later. The third reason, Olympic Stadium, was the other reason what killed baseball in Montreal, because from 69 to 76, rather, right, the Expos were playing at Jerry Park, and it was only there for 3 years because the Expos were supposed to move into a dome stadium by 1972, but by the time there was strike building the stadiums and whatnot, so it took them longer, and then they had to keep getting reprieves at the winter meetings, and eventually they were granted by Major League Baseball until Olympic Stadium was ready in 77. But the problem was when they moved into Olympic Stadium, it wasn't even complete, right? And it only took 10 years to complete, and it wasn't ready even during the Olympics in 76. However, why I'm getting at why it was bad, because it was very unsuitable to play baseball there. And mind you, Olympic Stadium, like many other stadiums at the time, a lot of teams played in multi-purpose stadiums, which were built for both football and baseball. The Pittsburgh Pirates did, the Philadelphia Phillies, the Oakland Athletics still do, the Baltimore Orioles did, the New York Mets for a brief period did as well. San Diego, not the Chargers, sorry, the San Diego Padres shared it with the San Diego Chargers. And also the Toronto Blue Jays played both Exhibition Stadium, which was really bad, and then eventually they moved to a more modernized multi-purpose stadium, which was the Skydome, which is now Rogers Center, which hosts both them and the Toronto Argonauts. But the problem was the NFL and the CFL are much different, right? So the field length was very bad, and it's hard to make it much bigger. What I'm getting at was that Olympic Stadium was caving in, so not that many people were coming. But the thing is, the Olympic Stadium, just like the Kingdome in Seattle, were very bad. Things were collapsing. Once the stadium was built, things collapsed from the stadium. Like parts of the roof collapsed in 1991, that prevented the Expos playing their in September of '91, which made the Expos play their last 13 games of the year on the road. The Seattle Mariners had a similar situation at the Kingdome, which caused them to play the rest of the games on the road. But when it was not filled, not that many people were coming, you're losing money, and it was so unsuitable to play. The turf was so terrible that people actually have to go run on outdoor parks to ease the strain on their knees. And this what prompted Andre Dawson to wanting to leave Montreal and go to Chicago Cubs, because his knees couldn't handle it anymore at center field at the Olympic Stadium. And the asterisk was so terrible, and the city didn't want to invest in it, prevented people from coming. And then when the Expos wanted to get a new stadium, they couldn't. And they couldn't play at Olympic Stadium, which is a dump. And now the fourth reason, which to top it all off, was the 1994 strike. And the 1994 strike, the Expos, because they were a small market, so in order to keep their players on their team, they had to be competitive. What they did is they developed great talent over the years. And then from their glory period from 79 to about 82, when they had a couple of the best teams in baseball, the only problem was the way the playoffs were structured back in that time. They only had 4 spots. Whoever won the American League East, the American League West, the NL East, and the NL West, and whoever won would play each other for the championship series, and then they'd go to a World Series. The Expos always got screwed over in that sense, because in '79 they were a couple of games back behind Pittsburgh. They lost, and they only lost out in 1980 to the eventual world champions Philadelphia. Pittsburgh also won '79. In 1980 it was Philadelphia by 1 game. So 1981 comes along, and coincidentally strikes were the only 2 years where they had their only chances of winning, because 1981 they went on strike for a good portion of the year, but when they came back, they decided to do a first half and a second half. Winners would go on. That was the only time they had a divisional series before '94, because only a championship series. So then, next thing you know it, the Expos finished first in the second half of the year, so they win their only division title in their history. They beat Philadelphia, but they lost to the Los Angeles Dodgers in 5 games, which we refer to as Blue Monday, when Rick Monday hit that home run in the top of the 9th inning off Steve Rogers, because Jeff Reardon, who was the closer, would have been in there. He was hurt. But anyway, now, once they played time, all their players, like when Gary Carter was set to become a free agent, and Andre Dawson, even though the knees were aggravated, and then Tim Raines, and other guys too who were coming up, they couldn't keep him because they also demanded more salary. So Charles Bronfman refused. Even though we had enough money, he couldn't do it. So all the players kept leaving. But when we sold the team to Claude Brochu, everyone was just coming and going. And the good reason was that when they got cheaper players, right, they developed Moises Alou to trade with Pittsburgh. They drafted Larry Walker, Marquise Grissom. They acquired John Whitman, who became a great closer for them. They had Delano de Shields, but they traded him for Pedro Martinez. At that time, it was considered to be a bad trade, but in the end, it was a good trade, because Pedro Martinez was that missing link for when '94 came around. And then you had guys like they get Mike Lansing and Jeff Fassaro and Darren Fletcher. But all in all, they produced a lot of great players, but they never played the whole careers here in Montreal. Like, as I said, Gary Carter and Andre Dawson and Timmy Raines and, Rusty Staub and whatnot. But then what I'm getting at here is in 1994, right, when they had a resurgence and everything, they were at the top of the National League East with a 74-40 record over the Atlanta Braves until this day, which was August 12th, because Major League Baseball decided that it was a good idea to go on strike. And nothing goes along, and the next thing you know, they cancel the rest of the season. So the Expos were denied a chance in let alone going to the World Series. It could have gone the year before, but as according to the wise words of Mitch Melnick, they had ran out of time in '93 because of the way the schedule was. That's why Philadelphia won the National League East, and they went on to the World Series only to lose to Toronto. And it could have been, imagine you would have had an all-Canadian World Series. Mind you, Americans probably wouldn't watch it because you're having 2 Canadian teams participating. You know, it's like the NHL. No one would want to watch an all-Canadian final in the Stanley Cup, you know. But anyway, so when '94, in September, they canceled Bud Selig, who was the acting commissioner at the time before he became commissioner. He decided to cancel the rest of the season. So then that was the only time that there was the second time in the history of Major League Baseball that there were no playoffs and no World Series in their history. Before that was 9 years before, in 1904. So next thing you know, when baseball came back in '95, they played 144 games, but Claude Brochu, since they had no money, and not only that, they couldn't keep their players, they couldn't keep their management, because Dave Dombrowski, who was just recently let go by the Detroit Tigers, he was originally the GM of the Expos, the youngest, and he left to become the GM of the Marlins, and he was replaced by Dan Duquette, who now is the GM of the Baltimore Orioles, and he left after to go become the GM of the Boston Red Sox, his hometown team. So Kevin Malone, you can't really fault Kevin Malone here, because he wasn't a bad GM. It's just the problem was, since they had no money, right, he had to, you know, sell off and trade the players. And Claude Brochu told him to go on a fire sale, which they never recovered from. So the first move, they traded John Wetland to the New York Yankees for virtually nothing. They traded Marquise Grissom to Atlanta Braves, a division rival, and he ended up helping them. And then Ken Hill was traded to the St. Louis Cardinals back. Larry Walker didn't give him anything arbitration, let him go for nothing to the Colorado, and he signed with the Colorado Rockies. So Marquise Grissom ended up winning the World Series with the Atlanta Braves in '95. The team of the '90s finally had their championship, from the words of Bob Costas when he made the final out in Game 6 when they won 1-0 against Cleveland on that home run by David Justice. But then the year after, John Wetland won the World Series in '96 with the New York Yankees, and he left. So in '95, they never recovered, and they never had a winning season. The only exceptions were '96 when they were actually half decent enough, and then they were only a few games behind the wild card when they finally had instituted wild card play, and they weren't going to catch a lot in '96. But in '96, they had guys, and they still were producing players from the farm. Like they acquired Henry Rodriguez, which was famous because he had a breakout year in '96, and he was famous for when he hit a home run, Expo fans would throw Henry bars on the feet on the Olympic Stadium, or when Roger Brulotte would be like, "Oh, Henry!" after a home run. And then they had drafted Mark Rudzelanek, who I remember mostly when he was in Chicago and St. Louis, not when he was not in his days here in Montreal. I was only 2 years old. So after '96, when they made the playoffs, they couldn't keep Moises Alou and Mel Rojas. They all left. And the next thing you know, in '97, they started going down. And even too, they had Cliff Floyd as well. They couldn't keep him. He left and whatnot. But mind you, they had also producing an up-and-comer by the name of Vladimir Guerrero. And since then, Claude Brochu had no choice. And then they wanted to get a new stadium, but they didn't. The provincial government did not. And had they got the new stadium, as I said earlier, Olympic Stadium was, you know, like the Kingdome in Seattle. Mind you, the Seattle Mariners played in a dump. But they got the new stadium after they had made the playoffs. Maybe had the strike been there in '94, well, it would have pushed them. Okay, you know, people, it will boost up things. We'll get it, you know. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And then afterward, when Claude Brochu tried to make his claim, and he didn't, he sold the team to Jeffrey Loria. He was another reason that killed baseball in Montreal, because they all viewed him as a savior. But the problem was he couldn't secure television rights on TV, on TSN. Like for English. For the French, managed to. So, mind you, with the prevention of Southern Ontario, the Expos virtually, in 2000, they couldn't get a contract for English television because TSN was only offering them $5,000 compared to the $200,000 they were offering Toronto for every Toronto Blue Jay game. For every game, they were going to televise they were going to pay $5,000. So, eventually, they didn't. They televised all their games on the computer in English, and French was still on the radio and whatnot. And it prompted the year after, when it was unsettled, it prompted Dave Van Horn, the voice from 1969, when they first came into the league, till 2000, to leave to become the broadcaster for the Florida Marlins. And he is he is by far one of the greatest commentators ever. Him, along with Dave Niehaus, may he rest in peace, for the Seattle Mariners. But anyway, after that, when Jeffrey Loria took it over, he decided, and it was kind of sketchy on the part, because after the 0-1 season, he sold the team to Major League Baseball. So Major League Baseball was owning Montreal, and he managed to buy the Marlins off John Henry, who bought the Boston Red Sox. The problem was, in 02 and 03, the Expos kind of had a resurgence, and they did not make the postseason. had identical 83 and 79, led by guys like Orlando Cabrera and Vladimir Guerrero, and they had like Levon Hernandez and Javier Vasquez. They had a decent club. But the problem was they couldn't get more money, and the GM was Omar Minaya, the first one who really he wasn't sure he wanted to bring the World Series here to Montreal. He went on a blockbuster deal, and it's considered to be very lopsided because Bartolo Colon was out the New York Mets. They traded for him, and they gave up prospects, and these prospects had terrific success. Grady Sizemore, Brandon Phillips, Cliff Lee, all went to Cleveland for Bartolo Colon. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? And then he left after the year because they couldn't afford him. And then in 2003, up until late August, they were tied with Florida and Philadelphia for that wild card spot. But the thing is, when the September call-ups came, they couldn't pay. They couldn't, the Major League Baseball was not giving them the money. And then they collapsed, they faded, and then the Marlins ended up winning the wild card and then winning the World Series. So Jeffrey Loria, yeah, look at me, I win the World Series, I'm so cool. But at the end of the day, it prompted, after 03, as I said, they couldn't afford to keep their players. Vladimir Guerrero left, and they ended up signing a contract with at the time they were the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, but before they were the Anaheim Angels. And then Javier Vasquez was part of that deal that he went to New York, to the New York Yankees. And then after 04, and they were only getting like 5,000 people a game, it was pretty pitiful compared to what they were getting in the 80s. They decided in late September. I still remember that day because I wasn't into baseball yet, but I finally understood what the points are. And when I found out, I'm not going to have a team anymore. It was hard, but I mean, at the end of the day, I got into it the year after, and when they became the Nationals, and it sucks. But I mean, at the end of the day, probably baseball will come back here one day, hopefully one day. But those are the things that capped off. And maybe if baseball does come back here, the only things if baseball were to come back here, they need is an owner who has bread or money. And the second thing is that they need a proper stadium, not Olympic Stadium, and it has to be near downtown. They could put it at the Hippodrome, which would be uptown, which is near Highway, it's near Ottawa to Carry, and it's also near Namur Metro, but at the same time, you got to weigh out the pros and cons. Because Olympic Stadium, it's not far from downtown, but the only problem is people from the western suburbs, like where I am in the West Island, people are not going to come make the half-hour trek to a stadium that is on the verge of collapsing. Anyway, that's another episode of PSN. I'm Petros Masha, your host. I'll be putting out a new video sometime either next week or within the next couple weeks. Until then, take care, and I hope to see you again soon. Peace.